How's everybody doing? My name is Todd Richards,
And I'm Darko Vukovic.
and we are with the County Freedom Coalition. And let me get the little things out of the way. Please like and subscribe and share this video. It only helps support the people that we are interviewing in now and the past and the future. It gives them the exposure that they need, and that's a good way for this video and all the previous and upcoming videos to get out, so that everybody gets a chance to see what's going on. So with that, in this podcast, we are interviewing people who are trying to advance liberty and freedom in the state of Colorado. And today we are joined by Ryan Armagost. Thank you, sir, for being a part. And
Absolutely, thank you.
Oops. And hope things are going well. I mean, the election is right around the corner. I think we'll be seeing ballots here in the mail probably in about 5 or 6 days. Probably this time next week they'll start appearing. So,
yes, sir.
It's a scary thing to see your name on a ballot.
It gets a little surreal.
yes, it does. It gets real surreal real quick. So, so with that, just gonna ask some simple questions. Where were you born?
I was born and raised in LaSalle, Colorado, and that was my small town experience. I started in a small town and ended up in a small town. So
that's good. Yeah. Where'd you go to high school in LaSalle?
In Gilchrist Valley High School.
Oh yeah, mm-hmm. That's right. You'd go down there. And did you go to college?
I did some college. It was during my military time.
All right. Yep. And let people know that what horrible military division or department were you in?
After high school, I went off to the Marine Corps. Spent 4 years active there, a couple of years reserve, and then came back to Colorado and joined the Colorado Army National Guard, where I finished my 22 years there.
Was it a good experience?
It was. If I had it all to do over again, I would do it over again exactly the same way. It was good.
Yep. Did you get deployed or sent off anywhere?
Yeah, I did once during the Marine Corps in '99. I went. It was just kind of afloat, so it was all over the world. And then in 2003 with the National Guard, went to Iraq for 03, 04, and then again in 2008 and 2009, and then Guantanamo Bay in 2014 and 2015.
First person I've met that went down there. So
yeah,
interesting.
Well, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
What is this first time you've run for office?
It is.
It is. Mm-hmm. So what made you run, and what made you run this time?
Well, when the tail end of my military career, I retired in late 2017. And during that time, I was also serving as a deputy with the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. I retired from Larimer County in the end of 2019 to finish a 10-year career there. And after that, things really took a turn for the worse. And it was an eye-opening experience for me just to see how quickly things turn on, law enforcement and our military. But the way things especially went for law enforcement, I had a Back the Blue rally here in Berthoud, and that made me become a villain. So during that time, I was fighting our town board here on some issues that they had with our peaceful rally, and just the freedom of speech that was just completely, people were fighting you if you were speaking anything other than what they wanted. So it was a very eye-opening experience for me. I started getting I've always been politically driven, but not in the eye of wanting to have a platform in politics. And that's where that drive started the end of 2020, I would say. And throughout 2021, I was looking for an opportunity. And at the end of 2021, with the redistricting of our House and Senate for Colorado, House District 64 came up in my area, and it was open. So I jumped on that opportunity, and so far it's been a very fruitful and rewarding experience in the drive forward there.
Do you have a party affiliation, Ryan, for your
Yes.
race?
Yeah, I've always been Republican. I've always considered myself a middle of the road Republican, but definitely have gotten over time and maturity. I think I've gotten a lot more stern in my conservative values, and so I would definitely consider myself a pretty strong Republican.
And you mentioned you retired from Larimer County was Sheriff's Department. Is that correct?
Correct.
Was that your own decision, or did something happen to kind of encourage you to retire, or how did that happen?
No, that was friends that I have that are still with the sheriff's office said I left right in time, but I left on my own accord. Just after retiring from the military, I kind of realized that if I was retiring there, I still had the same stress that I was dealing with in law enforcement. To get rid of all of that and just kind of have a laid back lifestyle, I needed to leave that as well. And since then, I've been doing executive protection and private security, which has been a lot more relaxing and low stress. So that for me has been a godsend. But I left then, yeah, not with any kind of anything that drove me, but I don't think I'd be able to maintain the way they're maintaining right now with all the just the negativity that law enforcement officers face on a day-to-day basis anymore.
And are you sure that politics is going to be less stress?
Oh no! See, that's where I chalk that up kind of with a midlife crisis. So to get jumping back into the fire, but yeah, it's definitely going to be stressful. But I think on this level, it gives me a platform. It gives me a voice to speak for a lot of people that are like-minded. And for me, it's a rewarding in that sense that, that law enforcement was a very thankless job. Whereas this, when you're a voice for a lot of people that wish they had that platform, but aren't willing to go through the rigmarole of campaigning and otherwise getting involved with politics, it's rewarding because those people are like, oh, thank you, thank you for doing what you're doing. It's good that we have somebody with a voice to stand up for what we believe. So I think in that aspect, with the stress and everything that we're with in politics, there's always that level of appreciation. It isn't as thankless as law enforcement was, for sure.
How do you? So you mentioned about giving a voice to like-minded people, but as a representative, you have to represent all the citizens of your jurisdiction. How do you, or district, I should say, how do you weigh that? How do you weigh having conflicting opinions from a variety of citizens groups and at the same time having your personal beliefs, but making sure that you're representing the district?
That's a great question. I think my district is mostly Weld County, a little bit of Larimer County. And with that, it is a very diverse district, a lot of rural, a lot of urban, different cultural areas throughout the district as well. So, I mean, it's something where you're going to have to bring everyone to the table, everyone to get a voice and speak what they're struggling with, what their issues are in the district, and do what you can to serve everyone at the same level. There are things that I'm not necessarily going to agree with, that I'm going to have to, my goal is to at least sit down and talk to people rather than just be, leaving half of my district blindfolded and muzzled, whereas the rest of the district fits in with my agenda, so they get to do that. They get to have a voice. I think everyone deserves the same opportunity at the table to bring common sense into what we're trying to accomplish. And I'm a common sense person. I think common sense politics needs to be reintroduced to all levels of politics, legislation especially. But I like to be that person where you can cross over the aisle and talk to people on both sides, either agree to disagree, or at least address and confirm what people's issues are, and hear what they're saying. That's important to me.
Yeah, you do have a really strange district. A lot of, like you said, a lot of rural, a lot of I bet there's a lot it's kind of probably a 50-50 split on the liberal conservative side. You get the Larimer County in there, and then and of course then your other big divide of the rural and urban part of it too. So it's that's a big it's a big task you got going there. Don't
Yeah,
envy
yeah.
you. Don't envy you in the slightest on that on that. Um, I guess one part of that, since you're going to have such a huge spread of people on their views and stuff, how would you define a compromise? And is there any room for compromise when a citizen's rights, constitutional rights, are at stake?
When constitutional rights are at stake, absolutely not. I'm a no compromise when it comes to our Constitution. I've sworn multiple oaths between military and law enforcement to protect and defend our Constitution, and that oath is never going to expire. I will, in every part of my life and employment and capacity, every breath I take is dedicated to protecting and defending our Constitution. So that is one area that I will not waver on at all.
So maybe a clarifying question here, Ryan. So I think a lot of times people who have not maybe read the Constitution, maybe haven't studied it in any capacity, haven't taken any oath to protect it, they might view somebody that, you know, is all about the Constitution as being like too in love with a literal text. And so maybe, and they might confuse that as kind of almost like a blind faith in people who existed 200 years ago or 200 plus years ago. How do you explain the purpose of the Constitution as it relates to any citizen of this country? Like, how do you make it more personal to the average person?
I think people just need to do exactly what you were saying, is just reading the Constitution, but not just reading, but reading into it, because the men that wrote the Constitution were brilliant in the aspect that they didn't just make it for that time. It is a timeless document that, sure, with the way things have evolved, that we constantly amend our Constitution, but when we're taking away rights, that's something that is absolutely not acceptable. Amending the way things are read or understood is something that I think is important. And the way laws change, of course, we're going to have to amend certain parts of our Constitution to fit into laws and regulations to make sure people are still safe and can live their life with happiness and liberty. But as far as taking away rights, that's something I'm absolutely not going to let happen under my watch.
Yeah, no, and I think a lot of times, you know, people maybe don't fully appreciate why the Constitution is there in the first place and how that separates America from other countries. I mean, I found this out a few years back, but I remember it struck me when I found out that America is the longest running form of government in the world, that every other country has revolved and had a revolution since. And so I think that's a testament to the Constitution and to the founders. And I think it's great to hear you say that there's no compromise with regard to personal rights, because they're there to protect everybody. How about compromise? Well, like, where do you see room for compromise, right? So it's like, I think one thing that happens a lot of times is, you know, our party wins, we get what we want. Your party wins, you get what you want. And it just becomes this tug of war that's not healthy. How do you compromise and find lasting solutions?
Well, I think first of all, firsthand, we're going to see it firsthand if we are able to take the House and or the Senate back, because we've been so heavily outweighed by the majority of the Democrats that a 41-24 vote on everything party line is just, there's really no reason to show up to work every day. Your voice is heard but not listened to. So having at least more balance in the House and hopefully the Senate is going to kind of force people to come to the table and compromise more, collaborate more on ideas, where we have to learn to meet in the middle. You have to be able to cross over the aisle, not be so lockstep and disciplined with your party's agenda, and worry more about the constituents and the morality behind what's being pushed forward. And I think that's what's left, is the morality and the common sense behind the bills. I was watching what was going through last year. It's just mind-blowing to see some of these things that went through and passed with that 41 vote all the way across. But not, having that balance in there basically forces both sides to come together and meet somewhere in the middle where we can say, I don't necessarily agree with this, but we have to get our point with this, and vice versa. So, there's going to be those points of everything where you just have to collaborate and compromise. And I'm hoping that we have enough people on both sides that are willing and able to do that this next session.
So, have a question since you were both military and a police officer. If domestic law enforcement is allowed to possess and employ specific arms and equipment due to the threat they faced with criminals, why should citizens not be allowed to possess the same arms and equipment to face the same risk as from the same criminals, and given they meet the same standards for obtaining equipment such as law enforcement? I don't think we need to be having big armored personnel carriers, being able to be driven around. But I mean, there is to a certain point. I kind of agree with that. The criminal is going to go out there and get the best and the biggest weapon they can possibly get their hands on to do what they tend to do, and the poor, person in the business or in their home is probably just going to have a small handgun, or maybe a shotgun if they're lucky. So
yeah, my stance on that is that I'm a firearms instructor as well. I'm an NRA certified firearms instructor and tactics instructor. I think the blindness that is put into legislation on that is the people that have no knowledge whatsoever of firearms, ammunition, ballistics, anything that relates to owning or caring for a firearm or shooting a firearm for that matter. If more legislators had that knowledge and experience, I think we'd be better off. But the people that are pushing that and saying that we as people can't keep arms to defend ourselves unless it's, like you said, a shotgun or a small bore rifle with less than 10 rounds in a magazine. Same thing with a pistol. That's not acceptable. That's putting the public in danger, and it's basically setting the public up for that whole anti-revolution ideology, which is the reason the Second Amendment was put into place in the first place. It's the whole well-regulated militia. Our rights shall not be infringed, but it's constantly being under attack to be infringed and completely taken away. But we have to stand up for all of our rights. But that one in particular, I own many firearms. I train people with firearms, so I'm a huge advocate for keeping and maintaining the same things, from rifle down to pistol, even obviously shotguns and everything else for hunting. But it doesn't have to be a hunting rifle or firearm for you to own a firearm. That's the whole point of having them for personal protection is equally important. So I'm all for it.
So Ryan, question: as a law enforcement officer, do you have any insights on where criminals obtain their weapons? Is it theft from regular citizens? Is there a black market? Is that black market active in Colorado? I mean, there's a lot of times a talking point which potentially could be overinflated and dismissed as a right-wing talking point, that it's like, oh, the criminals will always have the guns, therefore all you're doing is disarming the citizens. To what degree is that true, versus to what degree do regular citizens have some responsibility to bear for those arms getting in the hands of criminals?
Yeah, I think all of the above you mentioned, of all those points. People do need to take better care of their firearms. They need to be more responsible gun owners and keeping your firearms secure. I cringe every time I see in the news that a firearm was stolen from a vehicle or from a home. Just keep your firearms where they need to be kept. If it's on your nightstand, it's not likely someone's going to sneak into your house and take it from your nightstand right next to your head. That's understandable, but keeping firearms unsecured is it's irresponsible. But at the same time, that is not anywhere near the reason why. I mean, it's part of it, but not anywhere near the capacity of the reason why criminals have firearms. they're brought and dispersed from other states, from other countries. They're brought across our southern border. Fully automatic AK-47s, things of that sort, from military and other countries, law enforcement and cartels in other countries. So illegal weapons are always going to be brought into our country, especially when our country is so unsecure as it is. But to link that to any specific thing is, impossible, but it's linked to everything, and it's always going to be there. There's really, now that, we've been unsecure for so long, who we could never get a handle on how many illegal weapons are out there, and we can't hold our lawful gun owners accountable for that. We can't restrict them from owning a firearm simply because there are so many illegal firearms out there.
So here's a good one for you. Who has more jurisdiction, the city or the county or the state, or state versus federal? And are you comfortable directing law enforcement to defend the constitutional rights of citizens against law enforcement of a higher authority, which is enforcing laws you deem to violate citizens' constitutional rights? As example, there's a lot of stuff that went on during COVID, and granted, a lot of it was this, the scary unknown right there at the beginning, and just pretty much just they just clamped down on everything. But as it moved forward, it seemed like there were certain things that people could do and couldn't do, and then as we figured out, it seems like it was just people in office were using that power to, and I still don't get it, is telling people where they could go and what they couldn't do, and things like that. So
yeah, just to give a concrete example, Ryan. So like, I think the most pointed examples were coming out of New York, where people were being arrested and taken off premise for not presenting a vaccine passport at like a restaurant. And so is there room for a local law enforcement agency to intervene in a higher order police agency coming in to enforce laws like that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people realized how strong their county sheriff was during this whole time with COVID and everything else. I think municipally, with the city and town law enforcement agencies, they're appointed chiefs, appointed by commissioners and otherwise mayors. So they follow that they're appointed by a person that's elected. So they have to abide by their wants and desires, whereas the county sheriff is elected by the people. So the county sheriff gets a lot more ability to constitutionally protect the citizens of his or her county. So for that matter, I think they're some of the strongest people in the state and even the country at keeping things a little more at bay. And it comes down to, for state, our governor has the National Guard and has State Patrol to utilize, but it's obvious that neither of those can be weaponized kind of the way that nationally it seems like our FBI has been weaponized against citizens. And that's scary when you're just Joe Schmo living your life, and you have these things coming down to where you've been categorized as something by the federal government. But I think everyone should be able to comfortably rely on their county sheriff to be able to protect them from any kind of constitutional wrongdoing or violation of your constitutional rights.
Yeah, we had an interview with Kevin Ross, and his perspective was that one agency can't interfere with the workings of another agency, and there's going to be layered jurisdiction, but it's really up to the courts to defend your rights. Right. So, and I sympathize with that, because it would get confusing if you have, one cop who's called in to protect you and another cop who's called in to arrest you. It might get really confusing, but I do sympathize with the average citizen who, the idea of being arrested and taken to trial to present your case, to defend your own constitutional rights. I can imagine that a lot of people aren't ready for such an endeavor, and that they're going to be basically bullied into doing whatever the law states out of fear of
Mhm.
having to deal with that process. Any thoughts or comments on that, or any words of advice to the average citizen?
No, I would just say, you know, the same thing I tell people with firearm stuff is, or even just interactions with law enforcement. Don't try to handle your grievances with law enforcement on the roadside or otherwise on your doorstep. If you have grievances with your law enforcement, local law enforcement, it should be handled through the courts. It should always be handled that way. And with the violation of constitutional rights, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a pretty good attorney knocking on your door, offering their services because they want to go big with this, because that's something that can be easily won and make a lot of publicity. But again, it's one of those things where if you fear that issue or situation with your law enforcement, it might be time to find another community to live in. But yeah.
So what would you say to somebody who, you know, from the perspective of a law enforcement officer who maybe is intimidated by police?
Mhm.
How would you, you know, how would you draw the line between, you know, kind of the advice of don't be intimidated by your police force. They're there to help. Yes, you know, they're there to enforce laws, and yes, you might not be guilty, but you know, just trust the process and you'll have your chance to present your case. And, you know, it's up to the attorneys to figure it out, versus maybe your police force, you know, has a degree of corruption or has ill intent, or, you know, is okay trampling on your rights. And how do you know which one you're dealing with in your community?
I would say being a sober, moral, and prudent person is the best thing that you can do to protect yourself. The people that tend to have issues with law enforcement, and I am in no way saying that every law enforcement officer is looking out for everyone's best interests. Every job field out there, no matter what it is, has bad apples, and to the same degree. No one is immune from that. No agency or entity is immune from that. But as a law enforcement officer, I mean, even for 10 years in law enforcement, when I carry a firearm wherever I go, when I get pulled over, when I have interactions, it's still, I get stressed. So, I mean, it causes my heart rate to go up. I get a little flustered. So it's a normal reaction to feel intimidated or to feel, you know, a little bit nervous when you have an interaction with law enforcement at any level. But if you're a law enforcement officers, 9 times out of 10 is going to respond to your behavior. So if your character is off, if you're coming off defensive and otherwise rude, then probably that's going to be mirrored by their behavior, and it's going to make the hairs on the back of their neck stand up as well. So I think the biggest thing is just having good character, being polite, and being a sober, moral, and prudent person. And your day-to-day life, you should be okay.
What would be your benchmark for somebody to kind of come to the realization of, man, maybe I am in the wrong district. Maybe things are beyond repair, and this isn't a good place to live?
I think it's a matter of being the change that you want to see. I know from a lot of people, speaking Larimer County in particular, the chairman, Ron Weinberg, he came from South Africa, moved to California. California was pretty messed up, so Southern California, and he moved to Colorado and realized, holy cow, Colorado's turning into California. We should move again. And realizing he just kept running from one place to another, and when was it going to stop? So he dug his heels in here, and that's what really, honestly, was a big reason that inspired me to dig my heels in and be the change that I wanted to see. But don't just give up without putting up a fight and, you know, trying to be that change agent in one way or another, or getting behind a candidate that is willing to be that change agent for you. And wait and see, you know, let the sparks fly a little bit next year, see what happens, and over the next term, you know, or this election until the next election, see what happens. If there's any improvement, wait and see what happens for the next term. But otherwise, if it keeps going further and further downhill, and that seems like the only option for you, then maybe it is. But I would just say stick around and stay in the fight.
So, what are some of the what's your platform that you're kind of running on? What are the envisions? You know, things that you envision for your district? What you're trying to get across?
Well, crime and punishment public safety is number one for me. But with that, there's so many different aspects. I think the biggest crisis we have in Colorado, aside from our crime issue that we have, is mental health and addiction. Mental illness and addiction in Colorado, we are the worst in the country. So that needs to be repaired. People suffering from mental illness are self-medicating, getting addicted to drugs. So, I mean, it's just this vicious circle between illicit drugs, self-medicating through alcohol or whatever, to basically put a Band-Aid on a mental illness and causing people to act out and go into crisis mode in a lot of cases, which causes violent crime, theft, everything else that we're dealing with, for people to feed these addictions and feed their self-medicating for their mental illness. We need to fix our mental health issue in Colorado. And I think there's a lot of good things I personally can bring to the table to help manufacture that change, and the tools and resources that we need to make sure that we can fix that, as well as addiction. And I think that in and of itself will put a huge dent in the crime problem that we have here, and kind of repairing some of the out of control crime issues that we've had. With that, our veterans, we still have veterans from Vietnam era until, current conflict veterans that are dealing with mental health crisis and otherwise drug addiction issues and stuff like that. So as a veteran, that's a big important thing for me, to make sure that they have the resources available, and giving them as much, first responders and veterans, as much as we can to show our appreciation, the life that they live to protect us on a day-to-day basis, and the lifelong struggle that comes with that, based, simply from PTSD and things that they're exposed to. So making life as easy and making sure they're as taken care of as we can, before we're taking care of people that are coming to our country illegally and other things like that. So redirecting money, instead of dumping money into homelessness, realizing what the underlying causes for homelessness, addressing the mental health and addiction that most of our homeless population is struggling with, and correcting that to fix our homeless situation, correcting that to fix our crime and recidivism issues that we have in Colorado. And then, certainly last but not least is our constitutional rights. Like I said before, that's something that is always going to be near and dear to my heart, and on the forefront of what I'll be fighting for throughout my time if elected.
What's your take on if you had to assign a weighting to the crime increases in the recent 2-3 years? How much of that would you say is due to underlying economic issues versus, say, demoralized police versus repeat offenders just being released, like kind of being too easy on the punishment, or other factors? I'd love to hear your picture on where you think it's truly coming from.
Again, I'd say it's all of the above. I think the mental illness and addiction, people they're stealing things, catalytic converters, stealing cars, whatever, to get money for drugs, get money for this or that. But then getting into the crime and punishment, they're stealing a car, getting arrested, and getting a $250 bond. They're out the next day. Somebody beats their wife around, or husband around, whatever the case may be, goes to jail overnight on a domestic violence assault, and is out the next day on a PR bond. It's this catch and release thing where people just aren't held accountable. If that's the worst that's going to happen to me, I may as well do that again. I got a lot of money out of it yesterday. Let's do it again, and keep doing it and doing it. So we need to have stronger judges and prosecutors to make sure criminals are getting held accounted for. We need to set minimum punishments for violations for whatever level of misdemeanor or felony, to make sure that there's a deterrent to committing those crimes. They're not going to get away with it. It's going to be something that's going to sting when they get arrested and have to pay restitution and whatever the fines are, aside from jail time and possibly prison time. But we just need to revamp that whole system and set bills in place to make sure there's minimum punishments for everything, and making sure that we have judges and prosecutors that are strong enough to give those minimum sentences without letting criminals off as easily as they do, because that goes along with the drug and mental illness problem too. We have people that are just constantly released on their own accord into their own devices and end up coming right back through the system, and they just get in that vicious circle.
So with a couple questions here. So one, I guess minimum punishments, is that set by the legislators or is that set by some other group of people?
It used to be, well, statutes. So there used to be the sentencing. Counties have kind of taken it upon themselves to, and even judges, certain judges within counties have had different ideas of how sentences should be issued, the punishments that should be issued. But we need to bring it back to where we make it a statute. We make it something statewide that you come to Colorado and commit a crime, you're going to be held to the same standard no matter where you are in Colorado. So if that's what you're coming here to do,
and is that fair to say that those minimum punishments via statutes would be a top priority for you as a representative?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Got it. And then it sounds like you said the other part of the equation is prosecutors and judges. And I'm speaking from personal experience, but I would be surprised that most of the population wasn't in my position. I barely have enough time to really research the legislators and the mayor and maybe the governor. By the time we get to the judges on the ballot and the prosecutors, I'm so far removed from knowing how to go about that. You know, sometimes people might vote on party lines and maybe there's a degree of, substitution there. But I also feel like maybe that's insufficient. So if somebody had, let's say, 10 minutes to dedicate to researching their prosecutors and their judges, what would be your advice on how they could go about, as quickly as possible, determining who would be tough on crime?
Well, I think the biggest thing, like Sheriff Reams is a huge advocate for this. Steve Reams out of Weld County, the Weld County Sheriff, he puts the link up to show when there is a criminal that gets off with a PR bond or a ridiculous $150 cash bond for a violent crime or a big grand theft or something like that, what would otherwise be a felony that would keep them in jail for potentially years. They're letting off and they're out the next day. So when he sees that, he makes it public through social media and otherwise, so that everyone that follows what he's talking about in the Weld County Sheriff, what they're going on with their crime blotter. Oh, and by the way, this judge did this and let this person off this way. So he's making it public. I think more sheriff's offices should do that. I think more, if there are people that can do that research, it's public information. So if there are people that can do that research, make it as public as possible. Share that with people so that people are more aware, because I don't research judges either. I think it is time consuming. It is something that's very involved. And, we come up in an age where a lot of people just vote no down the line when they're electing their county judges, because they think there should be more rotation. But I'm not advocating for that, but I think that that mentality of just holding your judges accountable, you need to know what they're doing and hold them accountable for that.
Right. And that seems like, maybe that's something we can link to below, Todd, in the description. But that seems like maybe it's already too late by the time you're using that, because you're realizing, oh gosh, the people we elected are doing a poor job. Any advice on, whose endorsements to respect or listen to in terms of trying to decide on who to elect to those positions?
I think, and well, like I mentioned, Sheriff Steve Reams, he's spent his career in law enforcement. He's dealt with the people. He's been around when criminals actually were held accountable, to where now there's those few judges that aren't holding criminals accountable, and he's calling them out. He can recommend, which judges are still very strong in their punishments and sentences, as far as Weld County is concerned. Any other endorsements? I mean, there are people that belong to different public groups and advocate groups that might follow what they're saying for judges and this and that. But I would just say keep your ear to the grindstone. Just make sure you're staying aware of what's going on, and do the research. I mean, you can find out how to get into your county's public access for the courts and see what's going on in your courts as far as those criminals that are getting off. But pay attention to what's going on locally.
Would it be fair to say that, so Sheriff Reams is a Weld County, for somebody in another county, let's say you live in Boulder County or Denver or Arapahoe, is it fair to say that the sheriff of your county is going to have that best interest in his or her recommendations for judges? or do you feel like it would be suspect, depending on the county or depending on the person?
I think depending on who your sheriff is, yeah, you might not align with them politically or as far as criminal justice is concerned. So finding the information for yourself might be the best way to go through the courts, and just finding out what those dockets look like for that day, who got sentenced, what trials going on, what their punishment was versus what they were charged with and sentenced with, making sure that criminals are being held accountable, and if they're not, it's time to become an activist for it so that you can look out for yourself and your neighbors.
I got one for you. Since you were born in the rural part of the state, and I live in the rural part of the state, and that guy over there, he kind of lives in the urban part of the state. And that seems to have been a big hubbub there the last a couple of years, as this urban rural divide came to a head. I guess it was about a year and a half ago. The meet in day here in Weld County, and and it's still kind of going on, and to show that there still is a somewhat of a divide. What can you bring? You have a pretty diverse district, so what can you bring to that to help? You have the background of probably both. So what can you bring to help bridge that gap?
Yeah, I'm an avid meat eater, so I'm all about that protein. But I understand there's people out there that aren't. They're either vegan, vegetarian, whatever. They might not appreciate the same thing as the rest of the people do, but especially in rural districts and areas. But I think people have to appreciate when they go to the market what they're seeing. There's people that make a living off of putting that on the shelves, whether it's the meat, whether it's the grain, anything that they're getting, the ingredients of what they're buying comes from something agriculturally. And we have to appreciate and support our agricultural community. Colorado, especially, I mean, we're the dairy farms, the ranchers that are providing meat, the ranchers that are providing grain. We're one of the biggest providers of grain, millet, everything across the board for other states. And that's a big part of what we have in our beer as well. So, I mean, people that appreciate any part of life in Colorado have to appreciate where that's coming from. And agriculturally, that's what our state is. And that's how our state has become as wealthy and prosperous as it is. And for the people that are shutting out our agricultural leaders, you're basically shutting out any profit and for Colorado, but also what's provided. That's, the whole gift horse idea, where you have to appreciate where things are coming from, that they give us the livelihood that we have.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, seems to be, it'll probably be around for a while. People just if you're not out there on the farm producing those things, and some people don't understand. You ask them, where's your hamburger, or where's your corn come from, and they just say, well, it comes from the grocery store. And they don't realize, further and further down the line, it has to come from somewhere. It just doesn't magically appear on there. So that's always a good thing to try to get across to especially young kids. Where does that food come from? It doesn't come from the grocery store. Well, it does.
How do you kind of weigh let's say the benefits and the drawbacks of industry? I mean, I think what happens with affluent kind of left-leaning communities is that they tend to just focus on kind of eliminating all that industry so that they can have a place where they can still access all those resources, all those products and everything, but yet they don't have to have the drilling of natural gas in their neighborhood. They don't have to have the feedlot down the street. They don't have to deal with any of the consequences on air or water or traffic or trucking or noise from any of those things. So what's your philosophy around incorporating industry in a county or in a community, so that you can have the benefits of it, but at the same time you can mitigate or manage or deal with the consequences of that industry.
Well, I come from a background of, and it's even tattooed on my arm. Freedom does not come free. Nothing that we have comes for free. And there are people that take advantage of everything that we have, getting back to our agriculture, and meat and vegetables, and everything that's done on our agricultural side of the state. Industry is the same way. For people to think, turning a light switch on, sure, you might have solar panels on your roof, but you have to realize that there's going to be a power grid down the street. There's going to be a power plant. There's going to be fossil fuels. There's going to be this and that. Colorado has hot and cold seasons. People are appreciating their air conditioning. People are appreciating their heat and gas. So I think just to stop accepting things as being something that's free, it comes from something, and that the industrial side of Colorado or any state is just as important as the agricultural, and our energy, oil and gas, everything that we have. People shake their finger at, but they don't understand what they do. Even if they're using green energy, they're using energy that it still has a carbon footprint to keep the green energy going the way that it's going. So I think everyone has a good answer for replacing something with something, but there's really no solid way of doing it without getting rid of the industry that we have right now across the board. We have to find different ways of doing things. It might be cleaner, it might be less noisy or invasive in their day-to-day life. But until we have that concrete plan, we can't do away with what we've relied on for so long.
Yeah, and I just see this trend, and I think Europe is just getting punished by this right now of, I don't want it in my neighborhood. So rather than drill for gas in Germany and the Western European states, they've decided to offload that to Russia. And, to a large degree, we've done this with medicine and computer parts and things of that sort. And we just offloaded it to Asia because we don't want those industries here because of the negative consequences. Well, now this new set of negative consequences will manifest, and they could potentially be even worse. And, I like that philosophy, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but the idea of saying, hey, let's do it as locally as possible. And that way we have better oversight. We can make it better over time, but the closer it is to us, the more ability we have to influence it and impact it.
Yeah, and I think our oil and gas system is a perfect example of that, because people have been so critical of oil and gas in Colorado, which is another huge profit for Colorado. But something that was so profitable was so quickly shut down because of people thinking how dirty it is for the environment. No matter what we do, electric cars need to be charged. They're charged off of a power grid that's fueled by fossil fuels. I mean, everything leaves a carbon footprint. Until we have that fixed, we can't replace it until we have a solid plan. And in the meantime, we're fishing overseas for our oil and gas. We're going to Saudi Arabia. We're going to Russia. We're going to places that aren't looking out for our best interests. They are essentially enemies of the state that we're getting our resources from. And they're the dirtiest producing oil manufacturers in the world, whereas Colorado is one of the cleanest in the world because of all the restrictions and regulations that are on oil production in Colorado. So not having it here is causing so much more problems than when we did have it here. So yeah, just because people are tired of the noise and the smell, whatever they are living around it, whatever they're dealing with living around it, it's an unnecessary thing that we should have had and we should have kept and maintained. And hopefully we can again.
Cool. I got the ugly big elephant in the room question for you. Roe versus Wade was turned over to the states. And it allows, everybody screams, well, your right for abortion has been taken away. And it's like, no, it's been pushed out to the states where it should have been done in the first place. And states vote, the people can vote in the state of what they want to do. Colorado has one of the, I guess you would call it the most open abortion laws in the country. Do
I'll say
you,
it's the most extreme.
well, extreme, I guess that's a better word for it. Is there any room for, and this is, I guess, where it comes to that compromise. Is there any room for compromise to change it up a little bit? There's two sides of that coin. It doesn't matter how flat that pancake is. There's two sides to it. There's the one side that wants just no restrictions, and then there's the other side that wants no or all the restrictions. Is there room compromise to for both sides, for a conservative Republican or a liberal Democrat to be able to go ahead and say, this is what I want, and
Mhm.
each side be able to come up with a compromise, and you'll be heading to the up to the state house up there, and that's probably going to be one of those things that's going to pop up here pretty quick,
Oh,
especially
absolutely.
especially if it if the House and the Senate and maybe even the governor flips over,
Mhm.
that could become a hot topic quickly.
Oh yeah, even in my district and talking to people, this has become such a point of contention that I think people get so hung up on the idea of Roe versus Wade being dropped, but people saying that rights were taken away, and this is not a. There is nowhere in the Constitution where that was anywhere even vaguely listed as a federal right, a U.S. constitutional right. This is definitely something that belongs on the states. And yeah, there's always going to be compromise. I think in Colorado there should have been compromise, but we had that 41 party line vote to develop and pass the most extreme abortion bill in the state or in the country, sorry, or possibly even in the world. But it's disgusting that now Colorado, you can get an abortion up to the point of birth of the child. And the argument to that is that as a man, I don't have the right to tell a woman what to do with her body. And I think everyone has their own personal right to their own medical freedom, but you also have to consider the other partner in that case, who may be a man or a woman, but no matter what it is, there are two people that made that baby that have an equal opportunity to make a decision what happens with it. But you also have to think of the life of the child in the fetus. And I think more and more people are coming to a middle ground on this, even on the conservative side. Myself personally, I think there are exceptions to the pro-life. I'm pro-life, with exception to the idea of rape or incest, or obviously the life and health of the mother. If that becomes an issue, then yeah, there's going to be needs to terminate a pregnancy and that fetus and the child in that case too. But just to have that as a blind opportunity for somebody to abort a child up to the point of birth is one of the most immoral things I've heard of, and I can't believe it passed the way it did. So I think there's definitely room. It's going to be readdressed, if not this session. I hope it does this session, but it will be addressed again, and it needs to be amended to make it a much less extreme bill, and hopefully put some more regulations on the ability and free will to abort a child.
And
Yeah, what makes it such a difficult debate is I feel like people avoid or skirt around the key question, which is, when does life begin? And I think that, even if we can't come to a common agreement on what that point is in the maturity and the development of the fetus, I would love for the debate to actually just be, I think life starts at X point, and I think that's where we should draw the line. So I'm curious, do you have an opinion on where life begins, or how would you go about developing an opinion if you don't have a firmly held one right now about what that bar should be after which it's considered murder?
Yeah, I think as soon as there's a viable life inside of a person, that's a living child in there. There's a heart beating, that is a life, that is a being inside of another being. So that is the point it becomes murder. It's the same thing if somebody, take the Lacey Peterson case or any other, Shannon Watts, the person that murders a person that's pregnant is charged with the murder of that unborn child as well. You can't have that double standard. So there has to be some discussion on that as to why are we considering it a living being when it's this aspect, but when it's over here in this aspect, it's not. And to me, it's just the most frustrating when somebody, instead of choosing to have protected sex, or somebody choosing to abstain, instead they don't, and they go through the what you need to do to make a baby, and then choose later that they don't want the baby. I think that's careless, and that's where it becomes immoral, and you're taking the life of another human.
Yeah, and then I'm in that camp too. I think for me, the bar, the latest point is viability, where doctors can save the life of the child. And I'm somewhere in there between that and the heartbeat. And I don't have a firmly strong opinion yet, just because I don't feel educated enough in there. But I think most Americans would be somewhere in that zone. I respect arguments, before or after. I think there should be voted on like everything else, to come to a common understanding. But I do want to point out that there is a straw man argument in there about saving the life of the mother. You can save the life of the mother and try your best to save the life of the child. And if you're unable to save the life of the child, then there's no harm, no foul at the doctor, right? We're not going to hold the doctors responsible if they made their best effort. Right. I think the definition of an abortion is where you intentionally end the life of the child. And so I don't think there should ever be a case where you have to intentionally end the life of the child to save the mother. You should try to save both lives, prioritizing the life of the mother.
No, I agree with you there.
And I have another view on that is to adopt a child in the United States is ridiculous. It is just a lot of paperwork. It's expensive. That's why a lot of people go overseas and adopt children over there. And I just wondered if that's something that could be done at the state level, where the state of Colorado can make it much easier to adopt a child, and then or is that something that has to come at the federal level? And I think that if adoption was made much easier to do, we wouldn't be having a lot of this discussion. People would not choose abortion because it would be easier to adopt a child. So it's just one of my little viewpoints on there. I'll throw in there.
What are your guys' thoughts on the idea of it's like because I think adoption is irreversible, right? Once the procedure is done, the legal custody has been transferred and the original parents have no more say in that. Is that true?
As far as I believe, yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of people might say, I'm not in a position to take care of a child right now. And I can sympathize with that. I'm sure there's a lot of people dealing with a lot of problems, and you could even question the quality of life that child will have in many of those circumstances. So I wonder if there's something like extended foster care or something like that maybe says, hey, we're going to help you take care of that child until you're in a position where you're willing and able to assume responsibility for it again.
Yeah, or finding surrogacy programs or anything like that, making that more of an available option for people too, because there's so many mothers that would love to, get into having a surrogate mother to take the child as soon as it's born.
Yep. Do you have any information or thought or knowledge on the attacks on the pro-life centers? My understanding is that these are centers, and I could be ill-informed here, but my understanding is that there's centers that focus on trying to help mothers decide to keep the child and decide to have it and raise it, and would support post-pregnancy as well. And my understanding is that they have been attacked more and more across the nation. I don't know if this is a recent trend or if I just became aware of it recently. Do you have any thoughts or information on that?
I think it's been ongoing, but it's definitely spiked a lot more recently. That even happened down the road in Longmont here not too long ago, a religious organization that was doing that. But it's on any end. I mean, even if it's abortion clinics or anything like that, I don't advocate any kind of violence or destruction of property. I think it's gross, it's criminal. But that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that we're dealing with people that resort to acts of terrorism to get their point across, rather than coming to a table and discussing points of contention or topics of discussion.
Yeah, and I guess a slightly related topic, but it made me think of it is I heard recently that Vanderbilt University in Tennessee was going to stop gender conversion operations for minors. Do you guys know, is that something that happens in Colorado? Is that something that's being done at all through the state health system?
I
Any
don't know.
ideas?
If it's not happening already, I know it's going to be pushed by some of our people from the other side of the aisle very soon, because that is definitely one of their advocacy programs. And I know Arkansas has been very strong in, objecting to it and making sure that we're protecting our kids in that aspect too.
What's your position on that? If, let's say, the parents are supportive of such a surgery and, the child is supportive and a doctor is supportive, is it the place of the state to interfere with that?
I think again, it just comes down to morality. That's you're altering a child, a prepubescent child that hasn't even gone through puberty. They're in the confused stage. There's, not even to self exploration, and you're trying to tell them what gender they are. I think that's it's dangerous. If we're protecting kids from abuse of their parents, that's to me a form of it. You're potentially ruining your kid's life. They're talking about depression and things like that. This is a time where a lot of kids are dealing with mental health issues, and depression is one of the big ones. A lot of youth suicide, teen suicide, stuff like that after COVID has just been running rampant all over our nation. So to cater to something like that instead of just addressing the mental health issues, exacerbating things by hormone uh, therapy and stuff like that, and castration, taking their sexual organs, altering their gender. It's to me, it's immoral, and it's abuse. It's just unacceptable in my mind.
Yeah, it's a tough one because it's like some of the things line up. It's like, well, it's the parents' rights for the child, but I do agree with you. I think the key question there is like, at what point does it go from um, parents' rights to deal with their children's medical situation to abuse? And I think I'm right there with you. I think that one crosses the line. Gosh, I'm even against it post 18, but I feel like at some point we have to let you be an adult and do with your own body as you see fit, but
Yeah.
just doesn't feel right.
And it goes along with a lot of the different agendas that are being pushed. It's where do you draw the line? When we keep moving the line of morality further and further to the left, where does that morality become a point where somebody's like, okay, we've gone too far, and then you can't get it back. So we have to keep our line of morality and especially protecting our kids. That's what we hold near and dear. I'm a father of a 17-year-old. I would never do that to my kid. When he's
Right.
old enough to make that choice for himself as an adult, if that's what you choose in your adult life, you do what you want to do. But there's no place of a parent to push their kid into that direction, especially prepubescent, when they haven't even
Yeah.
gone through hormonal changes yet.
And not too far past that, but I mean, I wonder, like, what happens if you go to a doctor and say, hey, I believe I should cut off both my legs and I would be happier if I did,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, at what point is it the fiduciary responsibility of the doctor to say, like, no, like, that's not better for you, despite you wanting to do that, despite your parents being on board? That's just not medically better for you.
Yeah. It's just a matter, again, of bringing common sense and morality back into our lives, family, and God, or whatever people need in their lives, to bring that morality and their common sense back.
Right.
So before we wrap this thing up, is there anything you want to say to the people of House District 64? Get your word out there and tell them why they need to vote for you.
Yeah, I think the main thing people need to know about me is I'm not a career politician. I'm not an elitist. I'm a working class patriot. I've spent my life in the service, uh, through 22 years in the military, a couple years as a firefighter, and 10 years as a law enforcement officer. My life and my soul is around service. Uh, I want to continue serving, and I think this service is on a higher level to serve the constituents of Colorado and House District 64 specifically. So I love the opportunity to get your vote, and any support anyone has now or later is much appreciated. You can find my information, donate if you want, at armagost64.com. And I appreciate the time and everyone that is listening.
Alrighty. Well, with that, we thank you very much for coming and participating with us and answering our questions and getting your word out there. And make sure to once again tell your friends to like and share and subscribe so we can get that information out there and everybody else that's listening. You know, again, to help him get his word out. Like the video, subscribe to the video, and share it with everybody that you know. So once again, thank you for coming on, and thank you for your service. And hopefully here in, what are we looking at, 26 days, I guess it is now, something like that.
Yeah.
Yep, you'll be representative and no longer candidate. So
All right.
Yeah, best of luck, Ryan, and we hope to have you back on the show sometime.
Thank you. And thank you guys for the opportunity.
you betcha.
Much appreciated.